Okay, this is what the yips feels like. I have 4 examples. The first is a backflip. The yips feels like a backflip if you can't do a backflip. Somewhere in the jumping process, if you can't do a backflip, your body's going to shut you down. That's what the yips feels like. If this is a backflip, the yips is some invisible barrier that goes right there. And you can't really name it, but that's what it feels like. When you're throwing, the yips feels like this. There's some weird barrier between loading up to throw and going to throw. And it's as if your arm turns into spaghetti right here and right at release. What feels so bad is not only does it affect your throwing, but you find yourself on the bus on the way to the ballpark. You begin to dread that feeling of, dude, it's going to happen again. And baseball becomes the thing you love, but also the thing that brings you the most grief. The last example that I have for what the yips feels like is the throwing motion turns into this really complex formula that you just can't figure out. You begin to internally think about every angle your body is at in the middle of your throwing motion. And it almost feels like you have to be so precise with the angle of the ball and the angle of your fingers and the angle of your elbow. And if you're off just 1 millimeter, it's going to sail or it's going to hit the ground. In my experience, that's what the yips feels like. This is my experience with the yips. When I was a freshman in college, I came in a little unprepared, and the pressure of practices got to me very quickly. There was a first and third play where the shortstop was charging straight in, and I started to miss high or miss low, and I began to try to get it perfect. I wanted to hit him right in the middle of the chest, and every time it's like I just couldn't do it. And then all of a sudden, my throws started to spiral. One day, we were in the bullpen, and my pitching coach was off to the side with his hands behind his back. And as I went to go throw it, it's like my arm spazzed out, and I missed the pitcher and smacked our pitching coach. And from there, it was pretty well set in. I began to be very anxious with my throws back to the pitcher as a catcher. And I developed a safety throw. So I would just flick it. Instead of a full throw, I would just flick it with my wrist. And I got by in midweek games. But when I got my first conference start, everything hit the fan. I remember I bounced a throw back to our pitcher with a runner on third base, and my entire dugout was freaking out. Figure it out! And their entire dugout was laughing and pointing and yip, 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 making that kind of sound. And I remember it felt like the game was imploding. A few innings later, I went to throw it around the infield, and I bounced it to the third baseman twice. My coach pulled me out, and that was the end of that game and the worst, most embarrassing game of my freshman year. And I officially had the yips. Before we get into talking about breaking the yips, first I want to say that you should take heart, because if you have them or you're struggling with some sort of anxieties around throwing, you are most certainly not the first. And there is an incredibly long and very gifted list of players that have struggled or are struggling with the exact same thing. In fact, some sort of yips or performance anxiety, that type of anxiety appears all over the place. Think about a hitter who all of a sudden is 0 for their last 15 and they just can't square up a fastball. They just can't do it. There's forms of the yips across other disciplines. For example, musicians can get musician's cramp and struggle with pieces that they've played so many times. Divers, they have a very similar form of the yips where they get to the end of the board and it's like they just can't jump off. And I can't tell you how many pitchers that I've seen who are lights out in the bullpen, and then they get in the game and all of a sudden they've lost 4 miles an hour and they can't hit the strike zone. It happens to a lot of people. Not only that, if you watch an MLB baseball game or a high-level Division I college baseball game, you will see so many players who use this type of safety throw. Or pitchers who struggle to pick off. If you're struggling with the yips, 1, there's many that struggle with it, and 2, you can still serve your team by just getting by with what you have. I promise. Now, let's get into breaking the yips. One of the first things I think is helpful is to understand possibly what is happening. Imagine your mind is a hill covered in snow, and your thoughts are you sledding down that hill. You have somehow, I went down the same thought pattern over and over and over again until I had grooved that thought pattern. I automatically fell into it. No matter how hard I wanted to not care or just throw it, the thought pattern that I would always go down was I would think about my mechanics and how I would fix it. And even if I tried to focus and just let go, I couldn't because I had grooved that thought pattern in my mind too many times. So the first thing we have to do is we have to recognize our common thoughts, and whenever we go down that same thought pattern, we have to stop ourselves and put our focus somewhere else. And that's very challenging and it takes awareness. But if you're able to do that, to recognize your thought patterns, then eventually you can keep yourself from going down those thought patterns long enough for some fresh snow to cover the tracks you've made. The YIPS is a very tight feedback loop. Let me explain. And this may be a bit far out for some of you, but this might make so much sense. So this is a speaker, and this rock star here is holding a microphone. Imagine this. This is how the big speaker screech happens, to my understanding. So a small sound goes into the microphone, takes the sound, and it goes into the speaker, and then the speaker amplifies that sound. Well, if that louder sound goes back into the microphone, the process is repeated. So the louder sound goes through and then comes out the speaker even louder. And then a very small sound has begun to exponentially grow until it can literally blow a speaker. If you think about it, a very small worry has passed through your mind, and it passed through my mind. Oh, I hope I don't throw this into the outfield. That worry was then confounded and exponentially grown until the yips have formed. That's my understanding of it. Now, here's a paradox that's hard mentally. Let's say you or I, we are the rock star with the microphone, and the speaker is over there making a crazy sound. Our natural instinct would be to go to the speaker and try and fix it. But if you think about it, if you're holding the microphone, the closer you get to the speaker, the more of a problem it becomes. Here's the paradox. Our bodies are freaking out, and our brain wants to go solve it. But it is our brain and our body combating that makes the problem happen. So in trying to go fix it by thinking internally, you're actually exponentially making the problem worse. That's what I was talking about with the snowy hill. You have to somehow find a way to get out of your own way, which is really challenging, but that's what we're going to continue to talk about. How can we get out of our own way and just throw? This feeling sucks. Sick. Okay. So, I've been a catching instructor for several years now, so I've come across many players who have the YIPS. And this is what I do, generally speaking. If I recognize that they have them, which is pretty easy, for example, we're throwing at a short distance and they have to throw it really hard, or they have to look at their feet and shuffle their feet like 3 different ways, or it's just awkward for them until we get out past 90 feet. What I'll do is I will go get 2 buckets of baseballs, and I will set those 2 buckets beside me. And I'll go to play catch, and I'll get the ball going pretty fast. Naturally, somebody with the yips is going to sail me or throw it low. But what I do is if the ball isn't right here and easy to catch, I just let it go. And before the ball even lands behind me, I pick up another one out of the bucket and throw it. The player is usually embarrassed. I know I was. And I can see they're in their mind trying to figure out how to throw it correctly. If they make an excuse, then I know we've got more work to do. For example, they throw it, it slipped. They throw it, my wrist. They throw it, if there's an excuse, I know we haven't gotten to the most important part. So with these two buckets beside me, I just let him sail it. If it's not right here, I just let it go. Pick up a new one and throw it. And not only that, but I don't make a big deal about it because I know what they're feeling. I don't try and correct it. Whatever we're talking about, whether it's what they did that week or how the team's doing, I don't break conversation. As they throw it and it's going past me, I just pick up another one and throw it. And what I'm trying to help them do, and what seems to help, is I try and get them to the point where they can own it, where they see that I understand. And I don't hold it against them that they've sailed 6 baseballs. I don't care. I don't care. What I need for the player to do, and what helps the player, generally speaking, is if they can somehow be like, yeah, man, I'm kind of struggling throwing it. It's weird. And that's actually so much harder to say than you realize. For example, if you're struggling with the yips, go up to your head coach and say, hey, coach, the throw that I'm supposed to make 100 times today gives me really bad anxiety. Try that. It's probably so hard to be that vulnerable. But by taking the 2 buckets out, I think I'm able to convey to the player that I don't care and I expect it. And then, hopefully, they can own it. I know that helped me a lot. I remember I would just bring 3 baseballs and I'd tell the guy I was throwing with, like, I kind of get weirded out throwing short distances. I got a few extras. I know some coaches are complete and total bullies. The coach is like, figure it out, this, that, and the other. And that's great. We want perfection. The yips is a special case, and that really makes it worse. Somehow, as a player, you have to find a way to own it. I'm struggling with this. And then we can go to the next part. Okay, I don't know where you stand on Paleolithic cultures or the evolution of man, but I do know a pretty fairly well accepted idea in sports psychology, and it's this. Let me explain. Here's the theory. Many eons ago, our ancestors used to attack wolves or be attacked by wolves, and one guy with a spear is most certainly going to get eaten by a wolf. 3 guys with a spear are probably not going to get eaten by that wolf. So we developed in such a way that we need each other for survival. Now, imagine this. There are 2 potential tribesmen. There's a tribe that needs one more guy. One tribesman is really good at throwing a spear. He's really strong. He can carry an entire human. That's one tribesman. The second tribesman is very weak, does not know how to make a spear nor throw a spear. Which tribesman is going to be accepted into the tribe? Definitely the stronger, more capable one. The one that is not accepted into the tribe is most likely going to have to deal with the wolves. Sports psychology would say that we still have that wiring in our brain. And with that, a situation where we might embarrass ourselves in front of the tribe or our ego is threatened, it actually enlists a physiological effect that resembles a life-threatening situation. Let's say the possibility of throwing the ball into the outfield and the run scoring could embarrass you terribly. I know that feeling. We react, I might not be accepted by the tribe, which is terrible for my survival. It's an outdated emotional response. That's the theory. What you're dealing with, the anxieties around throwing and embarrassing yourself, is actually a survival response. That's why it's so hard to break. Your body is trying to keep you from dying in a roundabout way. If you're struggling with the yips or performance anxiety, you have to come to some conclusion, this isn't going to kill me. Even if this never goes away, even if the worst case scenario happens, I can never throw it back to the pitcher, or my pitching career is over, or I'm just in a forever slump. If that's the worst case scenario, if you can come to accept that and get cold about that and realize it's not going to kill you, then you may just find yourself objective and less emotional. Emotions cloud judgment. The best players are objective about themselves, and that is a true journey. You'll have to think on that on your own. If you are worried about messing up on the baseball field, you're worried about the tribesmen sending you out to the wolves. That's something to think on. All right, now hopefully we have a pretty good understanding where the yips comes from, what's happening inside of our bodies and why it sucks so bad. And now some practical steps on what you can do in practice, in games. First, You must have a mission focus. Here's what I mean. Whenever I was struggling with the yips, my focus was always, what part of my body do I need to move differently to throw this ball and get myself out of this terrible feeling? I had an internal focus. And think of your mind as a spotlight. So in that situation, my mind was spotlighted inward. If my attention was a spotlight, I was putting it all inside of what I was doing. And that's the same as that feedback loop reference I was making earlier. I was trying to go towards the speaker with the microphone to solve the problem. What I've learned is I have to find a mission, an external focus to take my attention and put it outward on. For example, let's say there's a catcher that's struggling with the yips. Every time your brain wants to go internal, as in thinking about how you're holding the ball, how you're flicking your wrist, how you're holding your elbow, every time your brain wants to do that, think about an external mission. Get the ball back to the pitcher. That's a mission. If you put all your attention on that, then it doesn't necessarily matter how you get the ball back to him or even how you feel. You can accomplish the mission. And then you get some form of gratification in that because you're accomplishing a mission. A hitter, for example. I remember when I was going at my worst as a hitter, I had an internal focus. How am I loading? Where are my hands going? When I was at my best, I had an external focus. When the pitcher loads, I load. I was focusing on the pitcher. See the ball up. Those were external focuses that I could put my entire attention on. And then once my attention was outward, all the practice I'd done was able to come out. And that's a great feeling. That leads us to the next and most important concept to understand. And that is you must focus on progress, not perfection. Let's look at it. Part 7, most likely the most important part. If you can understand this, you can have a really, really, really good practice. An individual practice by yourself or with a coach or with your team. If you can understand this will help you tremendously. And it'll also help you break the yips. So having a perfection mindset. So for instance, I'm pitching and I need this to be perfect. I'm hitting and I need to hit a 430-foot home run to left field. I need my swing to be perfect. Now that feels like you're trying to achieve something high. But actually, a perfection mindset is a lazy shortcut. Let's say the skill you're trying to acquire, in this particular instance, is breaking the yips. Breaking the yips is the peak of the mountain for you at this moment. If you have a perfection mindset, every moment that you're not at the peak is going to feel like a loss. And it's self-defeating. But if you have a progress mindset, then you can take the journey, try something, fail, try, fail, get better, try, fail. Keep going, focus on what you're doing, get a little better tomorrow, a little more confident, a little less emotional, and all of a sudden, you're at the peak. If you have a progress mindset, then little wins begin to fuel you. And you fall into what I'm going to call exponential growth. If you have a progress mindset and you hold it and maintain it day after day, moment after moment, you fall into exponential growth. Here's what I mean. So let's say I can only do 5 push-ups. So this X represents 5 push-ups. If I do 5 push-ups today, tomorrow, the next day, and 3 days after that, over and over and over, I may get to 7 push-ups. But if I do 7 push-ups over and over and over and over and over, then in another 4 days, 5 days, I can suddenly do 14. So it's been the same amount of time, but I'm getting a much larger result. And then I do 14 over and over and over and over. And then 4 or 5 days later, or a week, whatever it is, now I can do 27. And I do 27 over and over and over and over and over, and now I can do like 50 or 60. So it's the same amount of time, but with consistent work, I get exponential returns on my work. And this is how that might look visually. So the process, everybody's heard the process. This is to me what the process means and having a progress mindset. So let's say this wall represents a skill, a challenge. Let's say I'm hitting, and this wall represents a 80-mile-an-hour slider that's over the heart of the plate. So let's say that's a challenge for me off the machine. I foul it off, I foul it off, I foul it off. It's hard, can't do it. I'm late, I'm early, I'm hooking it, I'm slicing it, but I keep going, and I keep going, and all of a sudden I've got it. So every time I tried and failed, I ran into the wall. But if I have a progress mindset, then each one I get a little better, and all of a sudden I can do it, and I've made it over the wall. Woohoo! Now what? That's on to the next wall. So now I got an 85-mile-an-hour slider that starts to the middle and breaks to the outside corner. That's a little bit taller of a wall, but it's the exact same process. Foul it off, late. Get jammed, swing and miss. Come back to it the next day. Out front, late, slice, barrel, barrel, barrel. Now I've got it. An 85-mile-an-hour slider that starts in the middle and breaks away from me is no problem, thanks to the process. Fail, try again, fail, try again, fail, try again, fail, try again. I've made it over that wall. Now it's on to the next. Now, here's where we get into trouble if we have a perfection mindset. Let's say this skill is hitting a nasty changeup in the 9th inning of the biggest game of your season. That's the skill. That takes a lot of physical, emotional, mental maturity and skill. If you have a perfection mindset and you're here, so you've still got some learning to do. You've still got some work to do before you're here. Every moment that you're not capable of getting over this wall feels like a failure. That's a perfection mindset. But it's lazy because it discourages you from executing the process, failing, trying, showing up, making it over that wall. Failing, trying, making it over that wall. That is a progress mindset, and it's also how you break the yips. Give yourself a break, man. You're not going to be perfect. You're not going to throw it to the pitcher's chest every time right now because you're struggling with the yips. Accept it. Handle the emotions that come with it. Now adopt a progress mindset day after day, throw after throw. And I promise things are going to start to give way. Got a couple more tips. Here we go. Number 8, some practical steps that may not sound practical. At the peak of my baseball playing career, I was really playing well. Scouts were starting to show up. Things were going good for me. Baseball was easy. I remember going into our team bathroom in our clubhouse and noticing paper towels in the urinal. I don't know how they got there, who put them there, but it mattered to me so much that I didn't get anything on my jersey or that my teammates didn't get anything on their jersey that I got more paper towels and picked those paper towels out of the urinal. At that time in my career, I was very selfless. You fast forward a year later, and I never would have done that. I was all about me. And to go back to a reference earlier, my spotlight when I was going well was on others. When it was going poorly, it was on myself. But I acted that out practically every day. There's a paradox. The most selfish thing you can do to be a better baseball player is to be intentionally and practically selfless. Look around, see a need, and fill it. And that will draw out of you your very best. But look inside, think about all the things that you need and that you're missing, and you will naturally start to confound upon yourself. That's how it works. So practically, this is a depiction of me getting the paper towel out of the urinal. In practical ways, through action, not just words, do things where you are selfless. Sounds crazy, but I promise it's more practical than you can ever imagine. This depiction is a man folding a sweatshirt before putting it in a bag. Here's a story. There's a book called The Way of the Peaceful Warrior. It's very interesting. It's by Dan Millman. And the main character is a gymnast. And this gymnast goes through an incredible practice routine. It's the greatest routine of his life. When he jumps off the bar, he's sweating and exhausted. He throws the sweatshirt in the bag and he walks off satisfied. But his mentor, his teacher, stops him and says, "That last trick was terrible." The main character, the gymnast, he doesn't know what he's talking about. What he just did was Olympic level stuff. What do you mean? And he says, "No, that trick with your sweatshirt." And what the teacher was trying to impart in bold colors was this: you have to be somebody that you can trust all the time. I remember when I was struggling with the yips, it wasn't just baseball, but it was in a lot of areas in my life. If I set an alarm for 6:30, I might get up, I might not. If I told myself, okay, I'm gonna clean my room this afternoon, I might or I might not. The more you research peak performers, the more you find that if they say they're going to do something or they set their mind on something, they do it. And it's a function of both sport performance and all around integrity in their character. And like I said, it sounds impractical, but if you can think of one thing that you're neglecting or one way that you don't trust yourself and change that, it will come out on the baseball field. Not only that, but if you can be selfless on purpose, You will create a practice of putting your spotlight, your attention outward, and you won't miss things the way you do if your attention is inward, and it will, down the line, help you with your performance anxiety or YIPS. All right, last part. To conquer the YIPS, or these performance anxieties that you and I and many others struggle with, there has to be some element of faith that you work on daily. And what I mean by that is you have a hopeful expectation for good. You expect something good to happen. I do it through a Christian practice. You become better at seeing the situation in such a way that you expect it to go well. Then you, over time, will root out the pessimism that you likely carry, and it definitely affects the YIPS. If you're unaware of the way you speak to yourself, then you are likely pessimistic. That's our natural inclination. Negativity. How can things threaten me? How are things threatening me? How am I not getting mine? That is the natural inclination. But if you can cultivate a type of faith that expects something good to happen, then you might be onto something. And that's a daily practice that's outside of baseball that will slowly trickle and help you conquer your YIPS. Lastly, if you can learn to bless yourself, every time you catch yourself going down that negative path, man, I cannot throw, man, this is not going to go well. If you can catch yourself doing that, do the opposite. Even if it doesn't feel right. Man, I really do have talent for this game. Man, I've pushed through a lot. If you can flip your inner negative talk to something of blessing yourself, then eventually your YIPS will either be gone, manageable, or it really won't matter that much. My name's Chase, and I'm not a sports psychologist. I'm just a guy who struggled with performance anxiety and YIPS and help others work through it, and I hope it's been helpful for you. Enjoy the ballpark.